And in today's episode, we're taking a look at 5 video game movies that are actually worth watching. As I'm sure most of you are aware, video game movies and adaptations don't exactly have a good reputation for being any good. In fact, they tend to be downright terrible. For every decent video game movie, you have the likes of Max Payne, Alone in the Dark, Street Fighter Chun-Li. The list goes on of really horrible movies. And that's why I decided to put this list together as not only a gamer but a fan of movies, because I collect both. So after all the years of navigating this minefield, this really is a short list of worthwhile video game movies. With that being said, let's get to our first film. And the first film on our list is going to be Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, directed by Tetsuya Nomura, released in Japan in 2005, and then released in the West in 2006. Now I must say, when this first came out, it was certainly a breath of fresh air at the time, because the only Final Fantasy movie we had gotten up to that point was Final Fantasy Spirits Within, which was really just Final Fantasy in name only. It didn't feel like a Final Fantasy at all. It should have just been called The Spirits Within from the creators of Final Fantasy, not Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, because it just wasn't. It really is a decent movie, I don't hate it, but it was not a Final Fantasy. So when this came out, it was really exciting, and it actually lived up to it for the most part. Now, I'm going to be upfront about my bias here. Final Fantasy VII is my favorite video game of all time, so naturally I'm inclined to like this movie. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to be fair. There are some criticisms here. The story has some problems. It is a direct sequel to the original game, but it's always felt a bit contrived. For Advent Children, they added additional new characters. You have the little boy Denzo. Nothing wrong with them. I have no issue with the character. Where I do have an issue are the 3 new villains. They're pretty tacked on, and honestly, they can be pretty cringe-inducing. Which is unfortunate because Final Fantasy VII is known for its iconic villains, but don't worry, they're still connected here as well. It doesn't detract from all of the main characters necessarily, but it's one of the blemishes on this. And it is pretty hard to follow, even for people that are very familiar with the game. You have to really dig into it to figure out all the intricacies of what's going on and why. So yes, the story's not perfect, some of the added villains are not that great, but the pros absolutely outweigh the cons here. The soundtrack is fantastic from Yu Uematsu, of course, who's been composing Final Fantasy since the beginning, and he really outdid himself here. He did stuff he's never done before. I actually have the physical CD to this, and I've listened to it for years. The voice acting is very well done. While I tend to prefer the original language of any given foreign film, the English dubbing is actually really good here. While I said I have my various issues with the story, various story beats and character moments, on the other hand, are incredible at times. Really epic stuff, and some heartfelt stuff, especially if you're a fan. Now here's the funny part about the story and the lore. There's actually some interesting depth to the story that kind of reminds me of how the X-Men movies have played out. So originally when the X-Men trilogy came out, they were okay, and the third one was actually pretty terrible. But as we all know, our favorite thread that tied together all the X-Men movies throughout the years has always been Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. So watching Hugh Jackman continue to play Wolverine later on down the road actually helped me to reappreciate the older X-Men movies because he's all throughout them. And Advent Children kind of turned into that in a similar fashion. You have Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, with the third one on the way, and you have the original Final Fantasy VII and then Advent Children, and it all actually ties together in a multiverse. So you really don't want to just dismiss the story outright. There's a lot more going on here that's worth investigating, especially if you're a fan. They did a good job at the art direction of the original iconic characters. They hold up really well. Although I must admit, Barrett looks a little bit weird. He's one of the few that I actually wasn't crazy about, but that's just a minor critique. The CG animation is really great. All the individual animations and details still hold up to this day, and especially when you consider that all of the fight scenes are hand animated, so it's very impressive. Speaking of fighting sequences, they are absolutely incredible in this film. The action in general, the spectacle, is insane. And it doesn't matter if you're a Final Fantasy VII fan or not, it really is incredible. You just hardly see this anywhere else. But man, if you're a fan, God, it's just so epic at times. If anything, it might be a gateway to actually wanting to play Final Fantasy VII. Because like I said, they're all connected. And there are iconic moments in this that absolutely translated to what would come later in Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. Like I said, it's a sequel, but it's also a multiverse, so it gets pretty deep. So when you combine the gorgeous visuals, the absolutely insane action, the awesome score, memorable characters, all coming back together to do these insane things, If you're a Final Fantasy VII fan, you're going to be totally enthralled, and as a movie buff, at the very least, you're going to appreciate that it's an interesting CG animated film that really is gorgeous and holds up really well. So Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, you should give it a shot. It's an epic ride. And the next film on our list is going to be Silent Hill, directed by Christophe Gans and released in 2006. Similar to Advent Children, I went into this as an already existing fan of the franchise since I've been playing Silent Hill since the very beginning on PlayStation 1, as well as being a horror movie fan, so my expectations were pretty high when I went and saw this in the theater in 2006. And you know what? I was pleasantly surprised. This movie is actually quite good. Now, there are a few visual aspects that haven't aged the best, but that's because this is 2006 and it was only a $50 million budget at the time, so it's really a smaller movie. So they did the most with what they had. And it's always been a pleasant surprise. It's actually a faithful adaptation of the games. And I say games because it's not just a mere adaptation of the first game, it's actually based off of the first and second game, as well as little tidbits and nods to 3 and 4. Now obviously one of the biggest changes in the movie is Radha Mitchell playing a mother trying to help her daughter, rather than a father trying to find his daughter. While it is quite the change, they still pay homage to the original with Sean Bean playing Harry Mason, but in this case he's the husband that's still at home, actually trying to figure out what happened to his wife and adopted daughter. So it does add another dynamic to the film. So yeah, when I say faithful, it's not faithful in the sense that it's a direct adaptation, but it's faithful in respecting the source material. They clearly cared about what they were making. The director himself has also talked about in various interviews, criticizing other directors for not caring about source material when making video game films, and he himself is a fan of Silent Hill. And one massive component to this feeling like a Silent Hill is the fact that Akira Yamaoka is involved with this. He was an executive producer as well as his original music being throughout the film. If you're a big fan of his tunes, absolutely watch all the way through with the end credits. There's a lot of great music there. So that is by far one of my favorite things about the film, is all of Yamaoka's work being throughout. It really does make it feel like Silent Hill. So when you combine Yamaoka's work being throughout the film, monsters and creatures that are directly from the games, in the case of Pyramid Head, it's actually a live action actor doing it, and it looks fantastic. That's where they really capture the feel of the games. And another interesting aspect about this that's really tough to pull off in movies based on games is that feeling of solo exploration. Obviously, you can't do it too much in a film because it's not going to work pace-wise, but Rose's journey through Silent Hill and her experiences trying to find Sharon, it almost feels like the way you feel while exploring in the games, and that's actually really cool that they captured that. Because it really is tough to capture one-to-one what you're doing in the game versus what's in the movie. And an area I think they actually expanded on is Laurie Holden playing Sybil. She's really great as the character and a perfect fit. The performances across the board are solid, nobody phoned anything in, everybody actually cared about what they were doing, and like I said, this is a small budget film. Now the sequel, Silent Hill Revelation, it's awful, avoid like the plague. Thankfully this first one wasn't like that. So yeah, some of the original story elements either drag on too long with a little bit too much exposition or a bit convoluted. It's not perfect. There's actually quite a bit in this that's downright disturbing, so if you like disturbing horror films, you're going to be right at home here. But I would equally recommend this to both Silent Hill fans as well as just horror movie fans. So Silent Hill the movie, it's actually one of the better video game films and it's worth checking out. And our next movie is going to be Wreck-It Ralph, directed by Rich Moore and released in 2012. Now hold on, I already know what you're probably thinking, but that's not based on a video game. Which is why I carefully named the video Video Game Movies, not video game adaptations, because technically this is not, but it references real games all throughout the movie. But the reason I had to put it on this list is not only because it's a really good movie, it is an absolute love letter to gamers. I had to put it here, I love this movie. I mean, the movie gets its credibility right off the bat, referencing Mortal Kombat, Mario, Sonic, Street Fighter, House of the Dead, in just one singular scene of a group therapy session. It's absolutely hilarious, the references are all over the place, so you're going to have a great time spotting all of them. But not only that, John C. Reilly as Wreck-It Ralph is just fantastic in this. The movie's hilarious, heartfelt, wholesome, and a lot of fun, and it looks fantastic. Honestly, the visuals are so good, it looks like it came out yesterday, not 2012. It has great pacing, it keeps you engaged all the way through the very end, but the music is also really great here. The end credits song from Owl City is just fantastic. The story is really solid, you actually care about the characters, and it really plays into arcade gaming growing up. Because like I said, it's a love letter to gamers, especially 80s and 90s kids. And it also plays into 2000s kids. There's a little bit for everybody here. They even have hybrid references. There's clearly a lot of inspiration from Mario Kart, and one level in particular looks a lot like Candyland, the board game. So there's tons of things to look out for here. It's a lot of fun. And unlike the previous titles on this list, this is actually fun for the whole family. So that's also a plus. Stellar cast, great voice acting, funny writing, good storytelling, heartfelt themes, tons of actual references to real games all throughout. Wreck-It Ralph is so good, I don't just recommend it to gamers, I recommend it to film fanatics, everybody. Because in my book, there's hardly anybody that can't find something to appreciate about Wreck-It Ralph. And the next movie on our list is going to be Resident Evil Degeneration, directed by Makoto Kamiya and released in 2008. Now, as we all know, there are many Resident Evil movies, particularly all of the Milla Jovovich, Paul Anderson movies, which vary from pretty good to crap. Now, all of these straight-to-video CGI Resident Evil movies are actually closer tied to the games than those movies were. So they feel a lot more authentic, all the way down to having some of the original voice actors from the games reprising their roles in this. So in that case, you have Allison Court once again voicing Claire Redfield, who's also known for voicing Jubilee in the original X-Men cartoon. You have Paul Mercer reprising his role as Leon Kennedy, of course, from Resident Evil 4. And you also have some pretty good new characters, Angela Miller, who's voiced by Laura Bailey. Troy Baker is all throughout the cast in this as well, so it's actually a pretty stellar voice cast. So where this ties into the games, this takes place a year after Resident Evil 4, so you have the trained up Agent Leon, and you have the older, wiser Claire, and it's really cool to see them meet up again. Even though this is technically after Resident Evil 4, it actually feels like the Resident Evil 2 sequel that we never got, an actual Resident Evil 3, so that's actually pretty cool. They probably did that because they saw it as an opportunity to do it. Now, I'm not saying it's an award-winning story. It feels somewhat tacked on and contrived, but it's still pretty neat to revisit these characters. The CGI actually holds up quite well. It was very good for the time, and it holds up pretty well now. Claire actually looks quite impressive, as well as a few other characters. Leon, on the other hand, is the only one. He just looks pretty bad. I don't know what it is about his face. It just doesn't look right. But otherwise, I love that he's here because Leon's a great character. They even went as far as making Leon's pistol just like the game, so there's a lot of detail here that's actually quite cool. Now, even if you're not a Resident Evil nerd, this is actually a pretty solid zombie movie. George A. Romero style zombies, which is my personal favorite, so I'm always happy to see that. So really at the time, this was kind of the Resident Evil that we didn't get from the Paul Anderson movies. It actually cared about the source material more. Sort of like Silent Hill, if you're a fan of the franchise, you're definitely going to appreciate the authenticity that's here. Or if you're just a fan of horror films, you're going to appreciate the zombies aspects and the monsters. It's actually quite a bit of fun. Now, is this an Oscar-worthy film? Well, of course not. Is it very cool for Resident Evil fans? Absolutely. And it's also just a decent horror movie. And many would probably argue that it's far superior to most of the Paul Anderson movies, let's be real. Those kind of did their own thing. This is more authentic to the series. So Resident Evil Degeneration, it's actually pretty cool. You should check it out. And before we get to our last movie, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on the video. I'm excited to talk to you all. And finally, that brings us to Mortal Kombat, directed by Paul Anderson and released in 1995. So I've been playing Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 on both the arcades and Super Nintendo since I was a kid. I've always loved Mortal Kombat. So when I heard this movie was coming out, I was super excited. My older brother actually took me to watch it when I was around 8 years old. I absolutely loved it. It was a huge part of my childhood. And you know what? I'm just going to say it. This is the greatest video game movie ever made, to this day. Nothing's ever bested it. Sorry, hate to break it to you. Not going to argue with you. That's what it is. Mortal Kombat is fantastic. It's a blast. When it comes to straight film adaptations of games, this had no business being as good as it is. As much as Paul Anderson kind of butchered Resident Evil in later years, he nailed it with this movie. It was better than it had any right to be. Because when you think about it, the source material, there wasn't much to go off of. But they made it work. It was actually a miracle. The cast is fantastic here. The fight scenes are great. Clearly they kept the PG-13 versus the games being mature rated and gory because they wanted a wider audience to be able to see it. And honestly, I think that was the right call because I love it all the same and I was able to watch it as a young kid. And it really doesn't matter. You don't think about it. The fight scenes are absolutely fantastic. They hold up to this day. I think it's some of the best martial arts put to film. The soundtrack is absolutely freaking killer. One of the most iconic soundtracks of all the 90s. I listen to the CD to this day. The fight scene between Johnny Cage and Scorpion to Fear Factory music, holy, that is an awesome fight scene. It's no holds barred. The stunt work here is fantastic. You can really feel the hits and it looks great. The movie is pure hype, pure energy, pure badass. Now, is the movie up there with The Godfather or Taxi Driver? Well, no. This is a very different type of movie. It has its lane. It is an action, martial arts 90s romp, and it does it really well. But at the end of the day, what steers this movie, what keeps it on track, what keeps it from feeling too corny or off-putting or just not very good or anything, are the characters. You actually care about the characters. The performances are fun. The dialogue is witty. Everybody's just good in this. It's a lot of fun. So that's really the heart and soul of this, are the characters and actors. The fact that this is only on a $20 million budget is crazy. They maximized what they had. Clearly, this was Paul Anderson at his best. And in case you haven't noticed, there are some directors, they're only at their best when they don't have a lot to work with. And that was Paul Anderson in this case. He did a really great job with this. He made something out of nothing. One behind the scenes fact that's pretty cool. The original cut of the film actually was shorter. It didn't have the fight scene between Liu Kang and Reptile. But as they were screen testing and finishing the film, they realized they needed another fight scene. So they went back and added that fight scene later. And thank goodness they did, because it's one of the best scenes in the whole movie. It never fails to give me chills as he gets up and he says, Reptile. There are just scenes in this that never fail to give me goosebumps. So as you can tell, whether you're a Mortal Kombat fan, 90s movies fan, martial arts fan, action fan, it doesn't matter. Mortal Kombat is great. It's a lot of fun. You've absolutely got to check it out. You'll love it. So that was 5 video game movies that actually don't suck. They're actually pretty good, if not great at times. Thank you for watching up to this point. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to do more of these in the future. We'll see how it goes. If nothing else, God bless and have a wonderful day.